What I've become like more increasingly interested in is this gap that happens in medicine between like early detection and when people actually enter the healthcare system. So we're generally very good at treating disease and treating people once they become a problem. We're not very good at getting people to pay attention when they're still apparently healthy. So that's the space I'm interested in. That's what I focus on, and that sort of brings us to, the sort of uncomfortable part about healthcare. That is that we tend to imagine disease or health as a binary concept, right? Either we're sick or we're healthy, and you can say like, oh, yesterday I was healthy and today I have hypertension. Yesterday I was healthy, but today I have diabetes, and the reality is biology doesn't work like that. It's a continuum. So you can move from being healthy to accumulating risk to having, biological changes that you don't feel to early disease. And then eventually you get symptoms or complications. So by the time that you get symptoms, your body has already tried to fight it, has already failed fighting it, and then you have the disease. So if we think about Indian healthcare system, we're kind of in this area, right? You feel the disease, and then you go into the healthcare system, you seek help from a doctor. What we need to do is sort of assess people in this segment here. It's when they start to accumulate risk and they don't notice these silent changes. We need to be able to catch these so that we can prevent disease from happening in the first place, right? So the sort of important part here is that like this is our opportunity area, right? If we wait for a symptom to appear, we've already missed the preventive window. So the goal isn't to really make people paranoid about disease, because I think, that's how it can sometimes come across like, oh, you shouldn't have to worry about disease all the time. But the goal is to make you aware that the absence of symptoms doesn't necessarily mean the absence of risk, and it doesn't necessarily mean the presence of health. And another misconception that we sort of come across a lot is that prevention simply means eating healthy or exercising. That's one part of it, but prevention actually happens at several levels. So first, you prevent the problem from developing. Second, you can predict who is more likely to develop it. Third, you detect changes early. And lastly, if something has already happened, then you control it from becoming a bigger problem than it already is. So it's a lot like engineering, right? So the cheapest and easiest problem to fix is usually the problem that you can identify early. And the same principle applies to health. So the earlier you intervene, the more options you have. And really that's the philosophy behind preventive care, preventive health. Now let's sort of try to make it a bit more personal to what you guys might be experiencing, right? So the environment that most of us are working in today is very different from the environment that human beings evolved in. We now sit for very long periods. We spend hours looking at screens. We have constant cognitive stimulation, right? We're on this screen, we're in that meeting, we're code switching all the time. Even just, the world around us, food is available 24/7, caffeine is available 24/7. For most of us, especially since phones have now become, attached to us with an umbilical cord, essentially, we work almost any hour of the day. Exercise is something that you do if there's time left over for most people, right? And so the problem here is that our environment has changed, but our biology didn't get a software update. And your brain and your cardiovascular system don't know that you're sitting in a very comfortable office solving problems on a laptop, right? Your body is still responding to things like movement, sleep, food, stress, recovery, right? So technology has changed our environment much faster than biology can change. This leads to kind of the most dangerous sentence I hear is, I feel fine, right? This is something I hear all the time from a lot of people, even within my own family, my own circles, people who know I work in preventive health. They'll say, well, I feel fine. And the problem is that, high blood pressure can exist without symptoms. Prediabetes exists without symptoms. High cholesterol, no symptoms. These are known as the 3 deadliest diseases. They're called silent killers for a reason, because you don't get symptoms until it's too late. Early metabolic problems, also very, very minimal symptoms. Cardiovascular risk also builds silently. So, that's why symptoms aren't really a good screening mechanism. The symptoms are often the sign of, a sign of the body's, it's the body's version of an alarm, right? So when we think about prevention, we're asking can we detect a problem before the alarm goes off? And that's how we start to think fundamentally differently about healthcare. So it's no longer about, okay, I have a cold, I'm going to a doctor. It's how do I prevent that cold? And we kind of, we do actually practice preventive medicine in a lot of ways in our life. We just don't know it's preventive medicine. Like most of us will wake up and we'll brush our teeth, right? That's preventive medicine. Dentists are getting it right because you wake up and you brush your teeth. Why? It's so that you prevent cavities, right? And prevent dental damage. And that's an example of preventive healthcare. We do that for our teeth. We don't do it for the rest of our body. And I'll try to kind of, with my limited knowledge, try to sort of make an analogy here of how it might work with how you could be thinking about it. So, if you're responsible for an expensive robot, you don't want it to completely break down, right? You don't wait for it to completely break down. You have preventive maintenance, you have sensors, you monitor its performance, you look for abnormal signals, you inspect periodically, right? And ideally, you identify the problem before there's a breakdown. But when we look at ourselves, we often don't measure things until something goes wrong. We don't know our baseline. We don't know our performance metrics, which is blood pressure, blood sugar, all of these things. These are our vital signs. We don't always know our metabolic markers, what they look like. And sometimes we don't visit a doctor until we have a symptom, right? So, why is it that we maintain machines better than we maintain ourselves? And I'm not suggesting that, you need to obsessively monitor yourself. I'm just suggesting that you need a baseline and you need to know what normal looks like for you. So this is kind of the space that I work in my company. We sort of, that's the problem we're trying to solve for, where most of healthcare is organized around people entering the system when they have a problem. For us at BPM, we wanted to ask, what if we move that starting point earlier? So we've developed a proactive health system. This is designed around non-invasive screening, risk identification, and appropriate referral. So instead of saying you have a disease, the purpose is to say, here are the areas where we should pay attention. It's not what is the disease, is there a problem, right? So that problem could be in vision, it could be in hearing, it could be cardiovascular risk, it could be respiratory health, metabolic health, it could be, any of these areas depending on who you are as a person, what your genetics are, all of these things factor into it. And the most important thing to kind of keep in mind is that it's screening, it's not diagnostic, right? So it's about identifying who needs help in the next. So just like a brief identification of what we do. This is where the technology becomes really interesting for us because it allows us to move from, one doctor seeing one patient at a time towards a structured screening across larger populations. So the importance, it isn't really the technology itself, it's what the technology enables. So we're able to, through our system, stratify risk, identify disease risk early, provide referrals where intervention is needed, and also look at the population as a whole and understand, what are the patterns that we are seeing in our population. So for example, if we look at population level statistics for diabetes in India, 1 in 5 people have diabetes. And in fact, that number is starting to reduce in the sense that 1 in 4 people have diabetes, or 1 in 3 have pre-diabetes, or people who are younger, aged 14, 15, are starting to show signs of pre-diabetes. So these are population level insights that we're able to get through technology and screening. And because the best screening technology in the world is useless if the person identified of the risk doesn't get appropriate follow-up, we also have incorporated a system of referrals. So if we identify a risk, it doesn't just stop there. We push you to go and see the next specialist in that field so that you can actually take action on, the risk that you've identified. And we sort of, just a brief overview, this is what our reporting would look like. So ultimately, it comes down to a fairly simple outcome. We want people to have more information about their health while there's still something useful that they can do with that information, right? So the goal is to help people understand their risks and know when they need professional help, and ideally prevent the small problems from becoming bigger ones. And while this system can be fairly sophisticated, you don't always need a sophisticated screening platform or system to actually help you start on your path to preventive health, right? The goal is you should feel empowered. So let's sort of talk about how this can apply to you. So if you remember nothing else from today, I would want you to think about these 4 words: know, check, act, and discuss, right? So know your family history. Know roughly where you stand with things like blood pressure, weight, waist circumference, and relevant metabolic blood markers, right? And vaccination status. These are important things for you to understand as your baseline. Check things that are easy to neglect. Vision is a big one. Most of us work with laptops all day. Our vision is compromised, whether we like it or not, whether we want to admit it or not. Dental health. People don't realize, even if you're brushing twice a day, which you should be, make sure you are. Even if you're brushing twice a day, dental health and having any kind of infection in your mouth can directly affect your heart. Those are directly connected. There are cases of heart attacks that have happened from dental bacteria. So that's something that gets neglected a lot. People don't go to a dentist until they have a cavity. That's something you need to get checked and stay on top of. Mental well-being. As we live in a world with more and more competition, more and more pressure, this is something you have to keep an eye on. Monitor your anxiety levels. If you're having panic attacks, if you're having any kind of stress, it doesn't mean you can avoid stress. Stress is needed for growth, but it is important to manage it and have your coping mechanisms in place. And other lifestyle risks, right? So what kind of diet are you maintaining? Are you eating enough protein? Are you cutting down on carbs? Are you exercising? And not just as an afterthought, like, oh, I have 5 minutes now between a couple of things, let me exercise. No, are you actually dedicating time to exercise? These are things you have to act on, right? So we move on to the next, acting on the basics. Are you moving? Are you sleeping? Are you feeding yourself properly? Are you avoiding dangerous substances like tobacco and alcohol, right? And discuss the things that are actually persistent and unusual or changing in your system, in your body. And I'm deliberately not saying everyone needs every test every year, because preventive medicine isn't about ordering the maximum number of tests. I think that's something reactive care does more, right? You go to a doctor, they'll give you a battery of tests you have to do. I get it. I'm a doctor too. Sometimes we just need that information. But in preventive health, it's not necessarily about the number of tests you can do. It's more about doing the right test at the right time for the right person. So I guess if I had to reduce this entire conversation to about 4 steps, I would say this. It should be that you should know your baseline. That's because you can't manage something that you don't measure, right? This is definitely a principle you follow in your work. You measure everything because that's how you will understand, the documentation is how you can improve. Next would be find your risks. Again, here, family history, your lifestyle, your environment, and your own measurements. All of these things matter. Even simple things that we don't necessarily think about, right? Like metabolic markers. If most of you have ever used a smart scale, it'll tell you, for example, what is your visceral fat level. Now, your visceral fat level is an indicator of obesity. It's a marker of how much fat is accumulated around your internal organ. That is the most difficult fat to get rid of. And so if you're someone who has high diabetes risk, is obese, and has a high visceral fat level, that puts you at a very high risk of having cardiovascular risk and an increased chance of a stroke in 10 years. So these are things that, this information is important for you to have so that you can act on it. You can make changes and you can feel empowered about your own health in the same way that you do about the systems that you create. Change your inputs. So for example, sleep, movement, nutrition, tobacco, alcohol, stress, whatever your weak point is, work on that. And then lastly, always measure again, right? Did something improve? Did something get worse? What changes happened when you changed the input, right? What was the overall change that you experienced? So this is basically, trying to take an engineering mindset and applying it to health. And I think I'll close with, this 10-minute health audit that I want everyone to do. So I want you to be able to take away something from this presentation. So don't wait until Monday. Don't wait until New Year's where you'll, do a resolution. Do this tonight. And ask yourself these 10 questions, right? So how many hours did I sit today? When did I last exercise properly? Every part of your body. How many hours did I sleep last night? When did I last check my BP? And do I know my family history? How often am I eating ultra-processed or convenience food, right? How often, or do I use tobacco or nicotine? How often am I drinking alcohol? When was my last basic health check? The one that I care about the most is, what is the one thing I already know I should change? Because as I asked you those 9 questions, I'm sure 1 or 2 of them have already flagged in your mind, right? So what is the one thing you already know you need to change? It's not 10 things. It's not a complete lifestyle transformation, just one thing. And maybe you know that you're not sleeping enough. Maybe you know you haven't exercised in months. Maybe you smoke. Maybe you're drinking more than you'd like. Maybe you've never checked your blood pressure ever, right? And maybe your diet has become entirely dependent on Swiggy and Zomato. Whatever it is, you pick one and you treat it like an experiment, right? So change that variable for yourself. Give it 30 days, see what happens, right? So I'll go back to this. Know your baseline, find your risks, change your input, and measure it again. So for 30 days, I would like you guys to embrace this challenge and see what you're able to change, right? Because overall, we spend our professional lives trying to identify problems before they become failures. And your health deserves the same level of engineering, right? Because preventive health isn't really about living forever. It's about spending more of your life functioning well, improving the quality of your life and therefore extending its longevity. So I think that's my spiel about preventive health. And I think we can maybe open up for questions.
Actually, the one of the word what I have seen, because in rocketry or any other even robo or wherever we are working, we look for new technology, like 3D printing or carbon fiber, all these things we are now introducing. But she very nicely put, the body is running for the last 100,000 years without any change, which puts me into a little very interesting way of she puts that. Maybe I am not sure whether still we are not in a position to understand the best machine ever built in the world is the human. She may have indirectly told we cannot, that is the machine. Nobody can improvise or something like that. Well, she talked about a lot of good things about, maybe I think some of you may be knowing, I'm already 82 years old, but still working. And well, she talked many things, but I feel, what about the stress? Because sometimes my boss says you do this job within a week time and other thing. For as a preventive measure, I cannot change the boss. I cannot change the job. So there is no practically to measure the stress also, by way like a temperature or pressure or something like that. How do you advise if you are very much stressed? What are the preventive one has to?
For stress, there are multiple factors in our body that actually are an indicator of stress. For example, blood pressure is an indicator of stress. Having high blood pressure can be an indicator of stress, especially if you've been in prolonged stress, for many months, for many years. That shows up in your blood pressure. You will start to see it slowly moving towards the 130, 90 marker, right? That is a marker of stress. Other things in your body can also be a marker of stress. Inflammation is one of them. So when you look at blood work, you'll see that doctors love to do this test. It's called ESR or CRP. These are two biomarkers that we always look at. These are markers of inflammation in your body. Now, inflammation is directly related to stress. When you are under constant stress, these biomarkers will shoot up. So those are other things that you can keep an eye on. But those are the biological things. A lot of times it's more just psychological, right? It's about managing the stress with the right coping mechanisms. There is still, unfortunately, a lot of taboo around mental health and well-being in India. A lot of people will hesitate to go to a therapist when they need to. My advice is always to, that is your preventive health. Seek help. Talk to a third person. Sometimes it's very difficult to talk to family and friends. That's just the reality of the situation. There's context you might not be able to share with them. They may be the source of the problem realistically, right? So having a third person who you can share with, who you can sort of open up to, and who can give you the right kind of coping strategies for that stress is really important. So that is one of the most effective stress management strategies that I would advise to people. And then, of course, keeping an eye on the biological markers like signs of inflammation, sudden weight gain or sudden weight loss for some people, and then the BP changes as well. Monitoring those, knowing what they are, just being aware. You don't have to do it every day, but even if you do it once in a month, as you know that your stress level is changing, you'll be able to see that. Most people now wear smartwatches. You'll be able to see stress on your smartwatch. It shows up as higher heart rate, right? When you're just sitting around and your heart rate goes up above 100, 120, that's a sign of stress. So there are signs around you that you can catch of stress. And once you start to catch those, it's important to put in mechanisms to support yourself in mitigating those.
When I was young, maybe my mother used to ask me to take oil bath. Maybe you take castor oil, you have a small half a spoon. in a month to clean the stomach and other thing. And like that, there are preventive measures were there. But current way of life, whether we forgot or the modern medicine, they don't want to encourage such things.
So I guess because I have also trained in modern medicine, I have a bias on that front, sir. Um, but to be honest, there's a lot of home remedies and practices like that
Yeah.
that we have seen scientifically do have a background and have some root in science. They may not have been able to explain it in the right way, or it may not have evolved in a scientific way, through word of mouth. But for some of these practices, there is scientific evidence that it works, and for many there are not. So, I think sometimes it's also about belief. We talk about placebo effect a lot in science and in medicine. And I think this is one of those things, we'll still talk about, you shouldn't eat this thing with that thing. And there may be no scientific belief in it, but if you've grown up believing it, it has a power over your mind, right? Your mind controls everything. So there are preventive measures that have no scientific basis, but still work for some people because they believe in it. Like, I mean, on a personal note, I would say, for example, like if I go to the temple, it doesn't have a big effect on me, but my mom can go to the temple and she will feel blissful, right? So it's the same action, but because different people have different baselines, it will work differently for them. So that's also where, preventive medicine, precision medicine comes into play. And yeah, I wish I could say there's a scientific base to every, story that we hear growing up. But a lot of it does have to do with just your belief in it. And that will impact how much it actually works for you.
Dr. Mishra, that's a nice, really nice talk. Thank you. So first off, a disclaimer, I'm a hypochondriac myself. So my questions are kind of going to sound like that of a hypochondriac. So two questions really. So the first one has to do with generally, since you brought up this analogy with technology, very often with technology, we have clear goals that, if it's a rocket, if it's an airplane, it needs to be in a certain state. So it has a certain lifespan, it works reliably, and at the end of it, it fails, and we don't particularly care how it fails. But I think for humans, and I think this probably becomes important as you age, the failure mode starts to become a lot more relevant. I'm not that old yet, but what I seem to sense as age catches up is you're no longer thinking of longevity. You're thinking more about good quality of life for as long as it's there. So I suppose the first question is, in the current state of how preventive medicine seems to be coming up, is there an appreciation for the fact that very often it's not longevity or, just even the sheer short-term view that I need to be fit, I need to be fighting fit for the next 3 days. That's not typically how people assess life. So, I mean, when you think of technology, we have clear goals, but here I almost suspect there's a diversity of goals when you think of preventive medicine.
Okay. So I think the diversity of goals kind of comes from the fact that we are so diverse ourselves, right? Because every person's baseline is different. It's difficult to sort of set a standard that meets, everyone's goal. However, we do have standards, right? So, like a basic healthy BP is 120/80. I feel like most people would know that. Or fasting sugar should be under 100. Most people should know that, and that seems to be a baseline for everyone. However, that baseline also changes based on your status, like you said, as you get older, or if you've already been diagnosed. So, for example, someone who is a known diabetic, if their fasting blood sugar is under 120, that's considered good enough, right? So in medicine, we have to have that flexibility because everybody is different. So we have to have, a standard bell curve. 90% of the population needs to fit within that range, but there will always be outliers, and that's okay. I agree that in technology that sort of barrier is a little bit more rigid. And when it comes to quality of life, I think you're right in that a lot of people focus, especially in preventive care, about longevity. I think we hear about, the Blueprint Project and things like that. To be very honest, the people who are pushing those kinds of projects are far more marketing oriented. It sounds a lot nicer when you can say that you can live up to 100 and you can control that, right? But those people are essentially also looking for quality of life. Like if we talk about, again, Blueprint Project, I forgot, Brian Johnson. I think he was very recently diagnosed with some form of cancer. And so he was doing all of these things to increase his lifespan, but his quality of life was being affected and he didn't even know it, despite having all of this information, wealth of information about his health. So I think, longevity is a great marketing tool. But for the people who are really invested in preventive health and trying to build systems that empower patients, they know that it's really about quality of life, because someone who at age 25 realizes that they have high diabetes risk and starts making lifestyle changes can prevent the onset of diabetes for another 15 years. Whereas if they didn't have that information, by age 30, they could have been diagnosed with diabetes, and their life becomes, it starts to go downhill from there, because your immunity is compromised, the way you live your life is compromised, how much chocolate you get to eat is decreased. That is a sad thing in life. So, we do think about quality in life of life when we're talking about preventive health, but we don't. I think we don't advertise it as much because it doesn't sound as cool as you get to live until 100. So yeah.
But if I can ask a second question, and I'll stop after that. So one of the things that you always do, as you mentioned, is if you go into this reflective loop that you measure something, you assess, and you act. And very often the tendency is, if you see a number that's off in your charts, the tendency is to act. And again, out there you see a wide diversity of doctors. Some doctors who would say, don't act, just hold on, we'll see what happens. The others who are probably happier to just prescribe medicines and try and bring the number down. And my sense sometimes is if we have to develop a system based on predictive medicine, you need a consistent standard for a follow-on action in general. And my sense is that standard does not. Again, just drawing on from a personal anecdote, I was diagnosed with one number that was slightly off. I don't want to reveal that number. And there were a couple of doctors who said you need to start taking something, and some other doctors who said you don't need to do anything. Just manage your lifestyle and you'll be perfectly okay. And just keep track of that number. It's elevated, but if it doesn't elevate beyond the point, we don't. So so my sense is, I think with while it's great to have these numbers at your disposal, the absence of a standard follow-on procedure can sometimes seriously get in the way of what you do with those numbers. So, is there again anything in the field which says, we need to move from a standard testing procedure to a standard follow-up?
So that's, honestly, a great observation and a great question. And unfortunately, there isn't. And that's, I think, a massive limitation of the Indian healthcare system. Because, patients come in, we can tell them to come back in 3 months for a follow-up. Whether they come back or not, no one checks. Yeah, we sort of leave that ownership on the patients, and that system needs to be strengthened. You're right. Follow-ups are more important. And consistent follow-ups are more important. So one of the things that I try to focus on in my system is that we partner with doctors who we refer to, who are not just experts in the field, but also people who, stay on top of the medical research that's coming out, are really prioritizing patient care and not just the financial benefits that may come from healthcare. And so, unfortunately, that's, the ugly side of medicine. There are doctors who will just prescribe for the sake of prescribing. I hope you don't come across any of those. But yeah, we try at least on our end to prioritize follow-ups and to work with doctors who are genuinely passionate about care of the patient and outcomes of the patient. And that cannot really be monitored if you are not doing regular follow-ups. I wish there was a more sophisticated system built into our current healthcare ecosystem that prioritized follow-ups as much as it actually needs to be. But yeah, it's not there yet.
Okay.